What would you do if, in the quiet of a single night, a secret from your past suddenly appeared right in front of you, forcing you to face decades of memories, regrets, and unanswered questions? Think about it for a moment. Before we dive in, I want to know, where are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments below, because I want to hear your stories as we go on this journey together. The hospital at night had a rhythm all its own, subtle yet insistent, like the pulse of a hidden organism. The clamor of daytime emergencies had dissipated, leaving behind a quiet undercurrent. The persistent beeping of monitors, the occasional soft shuffle of shoes against polished floors, and the faint antiseptic tang that clung to the air as if reluctant to leave. Outside, the world continued its endless chatter. But here in these halls, life and death existed side by side, intertwined in ways that were both fragile and relentless. Hope flickered and waned in each room, and fear lingered silently, brushing against the edges of every heartbeat, every shallow breath. Emily moved through the ward with the precision of someone who had walked these halls for years, yet her movements carried more than rote routine. Each step was careful, each breath measured, as though acknowledging the presence of the lives resting around her. The way she carried herself suggested competence, yes, but also a deep, unspoken respect for fragility of existence. In bed 4, an elderly man lay unconscious, critically stable but delicate, his body tethered to life by the mechanical rhythm of monitors and the invisible thread of his own will. His chest rose and fell slowly, steadily, but Emily could see the subtle tremors beneath the surface, the frailty that reminded her, once again, how tenuous life could be. His face was a map of decades, deep wrinkles around sunken eyes, a mouth shaped by laughter and sorrow alike, hands knotted and thin like ancient roots. She reached out with a gloved hand, brushing lightly over his arm. The subtle tremor of his fingers spoke louder than any monitor. It was a reminder that life, even in its most diminished form, persisted. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "You're going to be okay," and the words fell heavier than any casual reassurance. They carried professional duty, yes, but also something more intimate, more fragile, an acknowledgement of the delicate balance holding him here, in this moment. Her eyes drifted toward the personal effects that had accompanied him from the ER. A neatly folded jacket lay to one side, a pair of reading glasses rested in a small case, and a sealed ER bag waited patiently, untouched and almost sacred. Normally, cataloging such items was a procedural task, a simple checkmark in a long list. Tonight, though, the objects seemed to hum with latent significance, as if they were vessels containing stories, secrets, and the weight of things yet to be revealed. The air in the room seemed to thrum with anticipation, subtle and almost imperceptible, making her pulse quicken without reason. The corridor beyond the door was faintly alive. Distant voices carried softly, the occasional hum of machinery punctuating the silence. Yet inside this room, the world felt compressed, intimate, heavy with unspoken tension. Emily knelt beside the bed, attending to lines, checking straps, confirming the gentle rise and fall of his chest. Every motion, ordinary in execution, carried with a profound intimacy tonight, a strange combination of duty and personal involvement that made the sterile room feel charged with quiet electricity. She leaned closer, voice barely above a whisper. "Stay with me." The words were professional, yes, a routine phrase she often repeated in her work. And yet, tonight, they seemed to stretch beyond mere duty, threading into a larger, unarticulated tension. Her heart thrummed unevenly beneath her chest, a reminder that even in the measured world of nursing, emotions could intrude, unbidden and persistent. Emily straightened slowly, taking in the room once more. Each detail, the rhythmic beeping, the faint smell of antiseptic, the subtle tremor in his fingers, the silent presence of his belongings, seemed charged, pregnant with meaning. She had a choice. Continue the night as if it were ordinary, or acknowledge the subtle call of curiosity, the sense that this shift, this moment, might bring something unexpected. The sealed ER bag sat quietly at the side of the bed, and with it, the unspoken promise of revelation, a story waiting to unfold in the shadows of fluorescent lights and quiet hallways. The night stretched on, expansive and slow, each heartbeat echoing through the room, each shallow breath marking a fragile rhythm of existence. Emily felt it in her chest, a tension that she could not yet name, a quiet anticipation that suggested the ordinary was about to dissolve into something extraordinary. In that fragile, humming stillness, she understood this was not just another night, not just another shift. The hospital, in its silent, mechanical way, was holding its breath, waiting for the story to reveal itself. And for Emily, every step, every glance, every heartbeat carried her closer to the truth that lay hidden in the quiet corners of the ward. Later that night, Emily returned to the small, dimly lit work area beside the ward. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, mixed with a lingering aroma of coffee from earlier breaks. The hum of the monitors in the nearby beds filtered in, punctuated occasionally by distant footsteps and the muffled voices of night shift staff. She had been tasked with cataloging the patient's belongings, a routine job, simple and procedural. Yet tonight the ordinary felt heavy with unspoken significance. Gloves on, she approached the sealed plastic bag that contained the patient's items. The bag was unassuming, transparent but official, the kind that usually carried jackets, glasses, and perhaps a small notebook. She picked it up carefully, feeling its slight weight, a mundane object holding a fragment of someone's life. Emily placed it on the desk in front of her, methodical in her approach, knowing that each item would need to be cataloged, logged, and stored according to hospital protocol. She unsealed the bag slowly, allowing her fingers to brush against the contents one by one. A neatly folded jacket, soft to touch, a pair of reading glasses, lenses smudged slightly, a small, worn notebook, its edges frayed. She cataloged each item with practiced efficiency, her mind running through checklists even as her gaze lingered just a fraction longer than usual. Then her fingers grazed something she did not immediately recognize, a leather wallet, worn and softened by years of use. She picked it up, turning it over in her hands. There was nothing remarkable at first glance, yet it carried a subtle, inexplicable weight, as if the object itself knew it contained significance beyond its apparent simplicity. Her breath hitched slightly, a quiet tremor in the pulse of her chest, though she could not yet place why. Opening the wallet, her eyes caught a photograph slipping out, fluttering softly against the desk before settling. It showed a woman holding a small child. Emily froze, her hands suspended midair, her heart constricted as a dizzying wave of recognition surged through her. The child's face, the tilt of the head, the delicate curve of a cheek, the faint, tentative smile, was undeniably hers. It was a sensation that left her vision slightly blurred, her chest tightening as though the air itself had grown heavier. She gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself, fingers trembling slightly. The man in bed 4, critically stable, fragile, and unconscious, was the same person who had abandoned her and her mother decades ago. The realization did not arrive neatly or clearly. It was a collision of past and present, of memory and perception, a sudden, disorienting surge that left her suspended between disbelief and unavoidable recognition. For several long minutes, Emily simply stared at the photograph. The little girl she had once been, longing for a father who had never come, stared back at her from the faded print. Memories poured in, the empty chair at the dinner table, the whispered prayers, the unspoken resentment held tightly for years. The adolescent who had vowed never to forgive stirred faintly in memory, the anger pressing against her chest like a weight she had carried silently all her life. And yet, amidst the swirl of emotion, another force tugged at her heart. Empathy, curiosity, a quiet, almost imperceptible pull toward understanding. She felt the draw to witness, to stay present, to confront the past embodied in this fragile man lying just a few feet away. The contrast between decades of absence and this immediate, critical presence was dizzying, almost too heavy to hold. Yet she did not let go. Emily traced the outline of the child's face in the photograph with a trembling finger, the edges worn and soft under her touch. The shock, the disbelief, the recognition, all collided into a single, powerful moment. She realized that the night ahead was no longer ordinary. Her routine duties had become entwined with something far deeper, something that could unravel the carefully measured world she had built for herself. She placed the photograph gently back into the wallet, her breath shallow and measured, attempting to regain composure. Her gaze drifted toward the man, critically stable yet unbearably vulnerable, and a quiet determination settled over her. She had a choice: to step back and preserve her professional detachment, to avoid confronting the past that had returned unbidden, or to remain, to witness, to bridge the years of absence with presence. The air in the room seemed to thrum with anticipation, each soft beep of the monitor marking not only the fragile rhythm of life, but also the weight of memory and the gravity of choices yet to be made. Emily whispered again, barely audible, almost ritualistic, almost professional. "Stay with me?" Tonight, those words carried a meaning far beyond their routine use. They were the first bridge between past and present, a quiet acknowledgement of a story that had waited decades to resurface. In the still hum of the hospital, Emily felt it. The night was no longer ordinary, and what was about to unfold would demand every ounce of courage, empathy, and presence she could summon. Memories surged like tides breaking against the cliffs of her mind, relentless and unbidden. Emily's gaze lingered on the photograph in her hand, and suddenly the sterile hospital room faded, replaced by the dim, cramped apartment of her childhood. She was a little girl again, sitting cross-legged on the worn wooden floor, the scent of stew and faintly damp laundry mingling in the air. The shadows of the room flickered with the glow of a single lamp, and everything felt impossibly vast and frightening, yet alive with the small, stubborn warmth of life, continuing despite hardship. Her mother moved quietly in the kitchen, exhausted but resolute, her hands deftly working through the motions of preparing another meager meal. The rhythmic clatter of pots and pans was a comforting counterpoint to the anxiety of absence, the absence of father who had never been present. Emily had watched wide-eyed, learning the language of love hidden in these small acts. The careful folding of a blanket, the gentle stirring of the pot, the way her mother hummed softly to herself as if coaxing the world to feel safer than it was. Those moments of quiet devotion were her first lessons in resilience, though she did not yet know the word for it. Nights were the hardest. She remembered staring at the empty chair at the dinner table, longing for the figure that had promised presence but delivered only absence. She whispered prayers under her breath, tiny, fragile hopes that her father would appear, that the world might somehow correct itself while she slept. The apartment felt impossibly large during those nights, every creak of the floorboards magnified, every shadow a potential intrusion of the void left by abandonment. She learned early how to inhabit solitude without complaint, how to fold her anger and sadness into pockets, carrying them quietly through the day. Her adolescence was no less fraught, though now the world outside the apartment beckoned with a strange allure, peers who seemed to exist in a separate universe of family, of belonging. She remembered staring out the window at the night sky, imagining the man who had never returned, wondering what he would say if he truly knew her, if he had truly been there. Anger, sharp and insistent, coiled in her chest like a living thing, a protective force against disappointment. She swore silently never to forgive, to shield herself from the pain that abandonment had etched so deeply into her being. And yet, life offered tiny, precious moments of beauty amid the hardship. Morning laughter shared with her mother over a cup of weak tea. Secret sketches of a future she dreamed of, carefully hidden under her pillow. Notes to herself, scribbled in pencil, whispering encouragements no one else could hear. She had built rituals of survival, each one a small rebellion against the emptiness, a claim on life and self that could not be stolen. These moments were fragile, yes, but they were hers, a testament to the strength that had grown quietly within her, unnoticed by the wider world, yet unassailable in its persistence. Now, decades later, the memories crashed back with full force. The little girl she had been, the adolescent armored in anger, and the adult she had become converged into a single, searing awareness. She saw the man lying unconscious before her, critically stable, fragile, yet undeniably real, and the years of absence, of longing, of unanswered questions pressed against her like a tidal wave. The hospital room reasserted itself, monitors beeping softly, antiseptic scent filling her nostrils, but the past lingered like a phantom, coloring every thought and heartbeat. She traced the outline of her own childhood face in the photograph, seeing not only the child who had waited, but also the resilience she had cultivated in secret. The contrast was dizzying. The years of longing and anger, the quiet acts of courage and empathy she had nurtured as an adult, all layered atop one another. She understood now that this night was more than a routine shift. It was a reckoning with the man who had abandoned her, with the years she had spent carrying resentment, with the woman she had become and a child she had never stopped protecting. Her fingers tightened around the photograph, crumpling the edges slightly, a tactile acknowledgement of the weight she bore. She felt the pull of empathy for the fragile human before her, even as a memory of absence burned in her chest. The little girl, the adolescent, the adult. They were all watching, silently demanding presence, demanding courage, demanding the confrontation that had been deferred for decades. The hospital room seemed both smaller and larger at once. The sterile walls and faint hum of machines contrasted sharply with the vivid life of memory flooding her mind. Yet she felt clarity emerging from the swirl of emotions. The night, this patient, this man, were not just about duty. They were about reconciliation, about the first steps toward understanding, about allowing herself to meet the past without turning away. Emily exhaled slowly, letting the memories settle like dust in a sunbeam. She felt the subtle stirrings of something she had not expected. Curiosity, compassion, the beginnings of forgiveness, not for him alone, but for herself, for the child who had longed, for the adolescent who had sworn never to forgive. The threads of her past were weaving into the present, fragile and tenuous, yet undeniably present, guiding her toward the choices that lay ahead. The night stretched long, quiet, and heavy with the weight of unspoken years. And as she whispered once more, almost to the child in the photograph, almost to herself, her words were a tentative bridge across time, memory, and fragile hope. "Stay with me?" Emily returned her gaze to the man in bed for, her hand hovering just above his frail, fragile wrist. The dim hospital light cast long shadows across his face, deepening the lines etched by time and absence. A familiar, bitter anger stirred first, sharp and insistent, as it always did when memories of abandonment pressed against her chest. The years of waiting, of unanswered questions, of silent longing coalesced into a tight knot of resentment that she could feel pulsing beneath her ribs. Her instincts whispered that she should step back, preserve her emotional boundaries, protect herself from the torrent of feeling that threatened to pull her under. And yet, beneath the anger, another force tugged at her, subtle, insistent, and almost impossible to ignore. Compassion. Responsibility. The empathy she had cultivated over decades of nursing, of being present for others in their most vulnerable moments, demanded that she act. He was a human being, fragile and finite, suspended between life and death in a way that was at once ordinary and extraordinary. Critically stable, yes, but teetering on the delicate precipice that separated survival from absence. He needed presence, someone to witness him, to hold the weight of the moment, even if he could never truly recognize it. Her mind oscillated rapidly between past and present. She thought of the little girl she had been, sitting alone in that dim apartment, staring at the empty chair where her father should have been. She remembered the adolescent who had built walls of anger around her heart, swearing silently never to forgive. And now, she considered the woman she had become, capable, resilient, and unwilling to allow bitterness to dictate her choices. Each version of herself seemed to whisper simultaneously, a chorus of memories, anger, and resilience, pressing her to make a decision. The soft beep of the monitor drew her back to the immediate reality of the hospital room. Each rise and fall of his chest, each subtle twitch of finger, each imperfect breath was a reminder that life persisted, tenuous but present. The weight of choice pressed down on her. She could leave, retreat behind the walls of her carefully constructed attachment, and preserve her anger. Or she could stay in the face of decades of absence, meet the past incarnate before her eyes, and act according to the principles she had spent her life cultivating. Empathy, presence, and courage. Her thoughts spun, dizzying in their intensity. Memories of longing, hurt, and betrayal collided with the quiet professionalism she had honed over years. The stark reality of his vulnerability, the palpable thread of life suspended in a fragile body, demanded more than rational detachment. She felt herself trembling slightly, a subtle quiver betraying the intensity of the conflict within. It was not merely professional duty that called her. It was a human imperative, a convergence of emotion, memory, and moral responsibility that made stepping away almost unthinkable. Emily's heart raced as she weighed each impulse. The bitter anger, though fierce, was no longer the only voice in her chest. Compassion rose like a tide, insistent, overwhelming, demanding that she acknowledge the humanity of the man before her. The fragile life in the bed, the photograph she had held, the years of longing, all pressed upon her in a tangible way, as if the air itself carried the gravity of decades into the room. The tension between self-preservation and the call of empathy stretched her, taut as a wire ready to snap, until clarity emerged from the storm. Slowly, deliberately, she allowed herself to choose. Her hand reached out, finally touching his, feeling the fragile warmth beneath her fingers. The action was small, almost imperceptible, yet monumental in consequence. It was a bridge between anger and compassion, between past and present, between the little girl who had waited and the adult who now had the power to confront the absence with presence rather than resentment. Her voice broke the quiet of the hospital room, low, measured, and heavy with emotion. "Stay with me?" The words had shifted now, no longer merely professional ritual. They carried the weight of decades, the unspoken acknowledgement of pain, longing, and responsibility. They were a tentative bridge, an intimate thread connecting her to the man before her, to the child she had once been, and to the adult she had painstakingly become. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. She observed him carefully, noting the rise and fall of his chest, the faint twitch of finger, the subtle signs of life that persisted despite years of absence. Her mind traced the contours of her anger and grief, weaving them into understanding and empathy. The decision to stay was not forgiveness, nor absolution, nor a promise of reconciliation. It was a conscious act of presence, a commitment to meet pain with courage rather than avoidance. The room seemed to hold its breath alongside her. The distant hum of the hospital faded, leaving only the quiet intimacy of the bedside, the fragile thread of life, and the weight of decades pressed into a single, suspended moment. Emily felt the storm of emotion within her begin to settle, not erased, but tempered, transformed into something actionable, human, profoundly necessary. In that stillness, in the fragile light of the hospital, her conflicted heart found a tentative peace. She had chosen presence over anger, empathy over resentment, courage over avoidance. And that choice, simple in principle yet monumental in consequence, would guide her into the night ahead, toward moments where memory, recognition, and reconciliation would converge with life itself. Emily's fingers remained lightly curled around his, feeling the faint warmth that whispered of life still present. The room was steeped in quiet, punctuated only by the steady hum of the monitors, each beat marking the fragile rhythm of his existence. The weight of the night pressed down upon her, a mixture of duty, memory, anger, and empathy, tangled together like threads too tightly wound to separate. She could step back, preserve the walls she had built over decades, allow herself to retreat into the safety of professional detachment. Or she could stay, confront the past incarnate before her eyes, and allow herself to act not just as a nurse, but as the woman she had become. Someone shaped by grief, resilience, and years of careful presence. Her eyes traveled over his face, tracing the lines of age, the creases of a life lived in ways both known and unknown. The man before her was critically stable, fragile, and yet unmistakably real. A figure whose absence had cast long shadows over childhood and adolescence. He did not know she was here. He would never fully grasp the presence of the daughter standing beside him. And yet, his vulnerability demanded acknowledgement. It demanded courage. It demanded that she make a choice that had been delayed for decades. Memories surged again with relentless force. She saw herself as a little girl, staring at a vacant chair at the table, longing for a father who had never arrived. She saw the adolescent, burning with anger, vowing never to forgive, a fortress of resentment shielding her from further disappointment. And now, she saw the adult she had become, strong, compassionate, capable of holding space for others even when it demanded sacrifice, even when it dredged up long-buried pain. The three cells converged, pressing her to act. The monitor beeped again, softly, almost rhythmically, pulling her back into the present. Each rise and fall of his chest was a reminder that life persisted, tenuous but insistent, that her choice would carry weight far beyond the sterile hospital walls. The pull of empathy rose steadily, like water filling a vessel, demanding that she acknowledge the fragile humanity of the man before her. The anger, sharp though it still was, began to soften beneath the current of moral imperative, reminding her that presence could be more powerful than resentment. Her heart raced as she weighed each possibility. Walking away would preserve her defenses, maintain the careful distance she had cultivated for decades. But staying meant entering the unknown, confronting her past, and bearing witness to a life that had shaped hers in profound and unresolved ways. The tension was almost unbearable, twisting in her chest, pressing her to make a choice that was both simple and monumental. Slowly, deliberately, she allowed herself to decide. Her hand tightened slightly on his, an acknowledgement that she would remain, that she would meet the past with courage and presence rather than avoidance. The decision unfolded in stages. First recognition of anger, then empathy, then a conscious alignment of her actions with the principles she had lived by for so long. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a first step toward something greater, toward reconciliation that could only begin in action. Her voice broke the silence of the hospital room, low, trembling yet deliberate. "Stay with me?" The words carried weight beyond professional rituals she had uttered before. They were infused with decades of memory, longing, and unresolved emotion. They were a bridge between past and present, between the child she had been and the adult she had become, a fragile acknowledgement that she would not abandon this moment, that she would hold presence above bitterness. Minutes stretched, the quiet punctuated only by the subtle movements of life she observed in him. Each breath, each flutter of his eyelids, each slight motion was a reminder that her choice mattered. Her mind traced the arc of her anger and grief, weaving them into empathy and courage, transforming the storm of emotion into an actionable commitment. The room seemed to suspend itself with her, holding its breath as she made the monumental choice to stay. The past pressed in from every direction, absence, longing, hurt, and she met it not with avoidance, but with presence. This act, small in motion but vast in consequence, set the course for the night ahead, for the moment of recognition and reconciliation yet to come. Emily's decision, simple in principle yet profound in effect, crystallized in the quiet intimacy of the hospital ward. She would remain. She would witness. She would act with courage, compassion, and presence. And in that decision, decades of anger, longing, and uncertainty began to settle into a fragile, quiet clarity, preparing her for climactic moments to follow. Hours passed in the quiet hospital room. Emily remained at his bedside, her hand lightly resting on his, attuned to every shallow breath, every subtle twitch in his fragile body. Time seemed to stretch and fold on itself, each second echoing with the weight of decades of absence, longing, and unresolved memory. The hum of the monitors became a quiet symphony, marking the tenuous rhythm of life that hovered between persistence and fragility. Then, suddenly, the silence fractured. A sharp, piercing alarm erupted from the monitor, a flat line, slicing through the stillness like a scream. Emily's heart leapt into her throat. Instinct and training collided, propelling her into action even as a rush of emotional overwhelm threatened to unbalance her. She pressed the silence button, her eyes scanning the vitals, confirming that he was critically unstable but still clinging to the thin thread of life. Her breath caught, and for a moment, the past and present collided violently. The photograph, the abandoned years, the long nights of wondering where he had been, all surged to the forefront of her mind. And yet, in the midst of this chaos, clarity emerged. She would not retreat. She would stay. She would hold presence for him, even if he could never fully know her. The man shifted slightly, a faint flicker of movement across his weary face. His eyes fluttered open, hazy and unfocused at first, but within them, a subtle recognition danced, a dizzying, fleeting familiarity that made Emily's chest tighten. He tried to speak, but his voice betrayed him, a fragile croak escaping instead, unsteady and incomplete. And still, he was there, the man who had been absent for decades, now reduced to the delicate, vulnerable form of humanity that demanded empathy. Emily squeezed his hand gently, tears gathering unbidden in her eyes. She leaned closer, feeling the weight of the decades pressing into present, and whispered, her voice trembling yet deliberate, "Stay with me?" The words were no longer those of a nurse merely fulfilling a duty. They carried the accumulated weight of memory, loss, grief, and longing, a bridge spanning decades of absence and silence. They connected the child she had once been, the adolescent forged in anger, and the woman who had chosen empathy as her guiding principle. They were an offering, fragile yet resolute, reaching across the thin divide of life and death. For a long, suspended moment, the room held its breath alongside her. She watched his chest rise and fall, each shallow breath a reminder of the tenuous thread that connected life to presence. His fingers twitched slightly in hers, a faint acknowledgement of her solidarity. His body moving subtly beneath the weight of her unwavering attention. Memories of abandonment, of birthdays spent without him, of whisper hopes and silent questions, all swirled around her, but she met them not with anger, but with courage, empathy, and the conscious choice to bear witness. The monitor's alarm faded into memory, the flat line replaced by the quiet hum of life, sustained against all odds. And then with a subtle, almost imperceptible exhale, he passed. The world outside the hospital remained unchanged, the night indifferent, yet within the walls of the room, a profound stillness settled. Emily remained kneeling beside him, her hand resting lightly on his, tears tracing slow paths down her cheeks, a quiet testament to the storm of emotion she had endured and the presence she had chosen to offer. In the fragile quiet, Emily understood something elemental. Presence matters. Witnessing matters. Compassion matters. The act of staying, of choosing to confront pain and absence with courage, had transformed the room, the night, and herself. She had not erased decades of absence, nor undone the past, but she had met it fully, humanly, and allowed herself to act in alignment with the woman she had become. The night lingered, soft and reflective, carrying the echoes of a life held, a life released, and a daughter who had faced the weight of her past with bravery. Emily's heart, conflicted and tender, now found a fragile clarity, a sense of peace born not from forgetting or absolution, but from presence, empathy, and the courage to choose human connection when it mattered most. Emily remained kneeling beside him long after the flat line had passed, her hand still resting lightly over his. The room was quiet now, the monitors displaying only the soft, steady hum of emptiness, the sterile walls absorbing the echo of the night's intensity. Time seemed to stretch indefinitely. Each second waited with memory, absence, and the fragile presence she had chosen to offer. She breathed slowly, deliberately, letting the silence settle over her like a protective shroud, allowing profound stillness to imprint itself on her very being. Her mind wandered through decades of absence. She saw herself as a little girl who had stared at an empty chair at the dinner table, imagining a father who never arrived, a heart carrying longing and unanswered questions. She saw the adolescent who had built walls of anger, fiercely guarding against disappointment, who had sworn silently never to forgive. And now, she recognized the adult she had become, someone capable of presence, compassion, and courage, even in the face of pain that had once felt insurmountable. The three selves converged in the quiet intimacy of the room, each lending strength to the other, each witnessing the weight of what had been endured. Tears rolled slowly down her cheeks as she pressed her lips together, swallowing hard against the swell of emotion that threatened to break her composure. And then, almost imperceptibly at first, she spoke, her voice low, deliberate, and trembling with decades of unspoken feeling. "I forgive you." The words were not intended solely for him. He could not fully comprehend them, could not articulate a response. They were for herself, for the child who had waited, for the adolescent who had steeled herself against pain, for the woman who had chosen courage over avoidance. They were a conscious act, a release of grief, anger, and longing, a declaration that she would no longer allow the absence to define her. Forgiveness, she realized, was not about excusing the past. It was about reclaiming her own life from the weight of memory. She adjusted the blanket over him, smoothing it carefully over his frail body, each motion reverent, deliberate, imbued with sorrow, compassion, and understanding. She lingered a moment longer, breathing in the quiet, the almost sacred intimacy that follows a life fully witnessed. The man before her, flawed and fragile, was no longer simply the father who had abandoned her. He was human, finite, and finally at rest. And in that acceptance, Emily found a fragile liberation she had never anticipated. Her mind traced the arc of the night, the dizzying recognition of the photograph, the rush of memory and longing, the agonizing internal conflict, the conscious choice to stay, and finally, the confrontation with mortality and the act of forgiveness. Each step had required courage. Each choice had carried weight. And now, in the quiet aftermath, she could feel the subtle shift in her chest, a soft, enduring clarity born from presence and compassion. The night outside remained quiet, indifferent, and yet the atmosphere within the hospital corridor seemed different somehow. Lighter, softer, almost reflective, as if the very walls had absorbed the reconciliation that had unfolded. Emily rose slowly from her kneeling position, her hand lingering in memory over the man she had known and the daughter he had never recognized. The act of forgiveness was not loud or celebrated. It was lived, embodied, and quietly transformative. As she walked down the corridor, each step measured and deliberate, Emily carried with her the lessons of the night. The strength that comes from presence, the courage required to meet pain with empathy, and the subtle, enduring liberation that forgiveness can bring. The way of the past had not vanished, nor had the memories lost their sharpness, but she had reshaped their meaning, reclaiming her life in the shadow of absence. And in the stillness of the hospital night, with its soft hum of life continuing around her, Emily understood a profound truth. That reconciliation begins with presence, that courage manifests in quiet choice, and that forgiveness, above all, frees the heart to move forward, unburdened yet deeply human. She carried that fragile, hard-won serenity with her, stepping fully into the next chapter of her life, forever marked but no longer defined by absence. The corridor outside the room stretched endlessly, bathed in the soft glow of fluorescent lights. The night was impossibly still, almost reverent, as if the hospital itself had paused to absorb the culmination of the hours that had just passed. Emily walked slowly, her footsteps echoing faintly against the polished floor, each one deliberate, measured, a quiet reflection of the weight she carried in her chest. The events of the night, the confrontation with her past, the fragile presence of the life teetering between continuation and cessation, the decades-long absence finally faced, reverberated within her, leaving a strange, almost ethereal lightness alongside the gravity. Her mind traced the journey of her own life, threading the little girl who had longed for a father into the adolescent armor with anger, and finally into the adult who had chosen empathy and courage over avoidance. Each step along that path had shaped her, taught her, and now, in the quiet reflection of this long night, all three cells converge into a singular understanding. The past, with all its unresolved longing and pain, does not define the present unless we allow it to. Emily realized that life's most profound lessons often arrive unbidden. They may come gently, almost imperceptibly, in a single glance or fleeting gesture, or they may arrive abruptly, demanding attention, reflection, and courage, forcing choices that carry consequences far beyond the immediate moment. The weight of absence, abandonment, regret, or loss does not disappear. The scars remain. Yet the way one responds to these burdens, the conscious choices made in the face of memory, are what shape the trajectory of life, the contours of the heart, and the depth of human resilience. She paused, glancing back at the room she had left behind. Within its walls, life had ended quietly, but in the process, something profound had been gained. The decades of unanswered questions, the unspoken words, and the silent grief had found acknowledgement through presence, courage, and compassion. Emily understood that forgiveness was not a gift granted to another, but liberation offered to oneself, a reclamation of power over a past that might otherwise dominate the present. The soft hum of the hospital enveloped her as she continued walking, each step a meditation on empathy, courage, and the quiet act of being present. Life, she reflected, often demands that we confront what we would rather ignore: absence, failure, disappointment, or pain. It is in meeting these challenges directly, with grace and presence, that one finds not only resolution, but also the profound capacity for transformation. Memories of her past still lingered, sharp and unyielding, yet they no longer carried the weight of paralysis. They had been reframed through conscious choice, presence in the moment, compassion for others and oneself, and the courage to forgive. She felt the subtle, enduring freedom of that realization, a quiet liberation that was neither loud nor dramatic, but deep, steady, and transformative. The night outside remained silent, reflective, and unchanging, yet within her, the world had shifted. Emily walked on, carrying the lessons etched into her heart. That presence matters more than absence. That courage and compassion can transform even decades of pain. And that forgiveness, above all, frees the heart to move forward. She understood that life will always carry shadows of memory and past loss. But it is the choices we make in response, quiet, deliberate, and human, that define not only a single night, but the life we continue to live. And as the soft hum of the hospital faded into the background, Emily embraced a fragile, hard-won serenity. She had faced the way of the past, and in doing so, she had discovered the enduring power of presence, empathy, and forgiveness. Truths that would accompany her into every night, every decision, and every moment yet to come. Life will always carry shadows of the past, but it's the choices we make to stay, to face what we fear, to forgive, that shape the person we become. If this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV for more stories that touch the heart. And remember, presence, compassion, and courage can change everything.